Hello YouTubers. So I wanted to post or upload, as the term is, to upload my findings from doing a theological search. The findings come from over some years, but this is a more recent thing over the last few months, where I've been trying to put down the various findings into a concise version, just to give all the most essential information in short and concise terms. So I'll just read through what those findings are so far. But suffice to say, there may be some mistakes in it. I'm sure there will be, and I'll probably have to re-edit and go back and look at where those mistakes are. I shall begin. There are so many different views about both life and death, and their meanings, so many competing beliefs, yet so many overlapping ones too. Such a wide variety, such a diversity, it seems sensible to record what I have learnt, what things I know or don't know to date. It seems especially important since so many theological claims make profound claims upon our own lives. So therefore it's an important thing to study from an individual point of view, also collectively in terms of what we're telling other people. We need to be cautious how we tell people things, but also what we tell people and why we believe the things we do. What evidence do we have, and have we examined the evidence clearly enough? In all investigations, be they scientific, criminal, philosophical, theological, in whatever field, it's important to remember our conclusions must be evidence-led, rather than evidence being edited to fit in with some assumptions or biases which we all tend to have. We must strive to be obedient to the truth as we have come to understand it, as much as we know it. Not that we'll know the truth. There may be things, many things there will be that we don't know. But it's really important to challenge long-held beliefs that we have, that may be assumptions, that may not be. And anything that is true will withstand any fair questioning. And anything that's not won't stand up to it, in fact. And so all the more reason, either way, whether it turns out to be true or not, all the more reason on important things to give it fair questioning, as long as it is fair, that is. Furthermore, we must be cautious to discern what we know from what we don't know, neither afraid to admit to things that we do know, nor to admit to things that we don't know. Sometimes we like to suggest that we know more than we do to appear all-knowing, and it's the comfort in having an all-knowing sort of belief system. But at the same time, it could be quite dishonest of us as well, to sort of pretend to have more information than we do. It can be difficult living with a mystery sometimes, living with unanswered questions. Sometimes it's hard to admit to things that we don't know, actually, and to being ignorant in some things, maybe having not taken enough time to study things properly, or having not had the opportunity to, or perhaps even it could be that we have taken the time and studied it, but we just haven't found those answers still, and they're perhaps unyielding, and that we have to live with those mysteries. And it may even be that there are some things about our own lives that we don't know, and that's quite hard to sometimes admit to other people, isn't it? And that we still have blank pages in our own life stories to fill in and to find out. Sometimes the desire to know all and have absolute knowledge can lead us wrongfully into making false statements or exaggerating that which we do know. And no answer is always preferable to the wrong answer. So in an investigation, especially when it's time sensitive, and especially when there's a lot of pressure as well to find an answer, it can be all too tempting, and to actually just try and find any old answer, just to stick it in and just to find something at least to give people If you think about a police investigation, you're looking to sort of appease the public and the victim's family. There's a lot of pressure mounting to sort of make sure that you get the right person and that the public are safe. And so there's a lot of pressure that can be put on there in terms of publicity as well, to make sure that you get the case wrapped up ASAP. But of course, you don't want to rush it and get the wrong person convicted of the wrong crime and have somebody potentially dangerous on the street and an innocent person in prison. So, in terms of a police investigation, it's quite obvious in that you don't want a rushed investigation and a wrong answer. In terms of any investigation, that's also true. In a medical diagnosis, you don't want to have the wrong diagnosis for something. You'll be giving yourself wrong treatments for things, and or no treatments perhaps, and you'll be working on the wrong assumptions of it. So you need to go back and question, quite fairly, why you came to those conclusions, and was that legitimate? Was it fair to have come to those? And it's all too tempting for many reasons, in fact, to just force a wrong answer or come up with something because of all those pressures. No answer then is always preferable to a wrong answer, especially if it has been assumed to be right. So if we assume something is right and it's not, then we stop looking, of course. The investigation's then closed. It's assumed we already know the answer to something. But perhaps this has been accepted without sufficient investigations. For when wrong answers are assumed to already be correct, then we no longer seek those answers. We must live with the answers we have found, or that have found us, and seek their relevance. And for the blank pages unknown, we must be patient. And there's a lot of patience, of course, involved in a long-term investigation. The twists and turns that can happen, of course, the false leads, where the red herrings, where you think you're onto something, it turns out not to be. Those, of course, have to be looked into fairly, sure. But if you make a mistake, sometimes you just have to say and backtrack and say, got that wrong. And that's harder, of course, the deeper you've gone into investigation. If you've been off on the wrong trail and the wrong assumption for weeks, months, years even, it becomes that much harder to then redraw the map and sort of go back all that time, because you've invested so much time and energy, sometimes money into it. And, personal reputations as well can be at stake. But all the more important still to try and admit to wherever mistakes are. And sometimes there can be genuine errors that we all make sometimes. And that's just part of life, isn't it? And it is the love of man to reveal things. Yet there can also be no revealing without also concealment. You can't have revelations without things first being concealed or contained, or there be secrets or mysteries, to call it that. Just as there may be reasons to learn and know some things at a particular point of time, there may well be reasons not to know those things. So it may be that we can't find out certain things until certain times. Perhaps we don't need to know it until a particular time, or we're not going to be able to deal with it until a certain time. We cannot always realise why it is right or wrong to know. Yet even so, there may be reasons beyond our knowledge. For example, a child may not know why a parent has introduced certain things at a certain age, whilst withholding other things. To a child, we don't always know why even a good parent acts the way they do sometimes. Especially when they're introducing a new kind of style or technique of doing something that's different or alien to something that we've earlier encountered. And we may fairly question them, and we may not understand their answers or their reasoning for it. Now, if we trust that they do have good intentions, if we think that they have a benevolent care for us, then we should be able to trust them, even if we don't know what those reasons are. I learnt that I had lived before and died before, Yet I have no actual memory of any of these things, only feelings of my life, having had some resemblance to the person later referred to as Jesus in the accounts. Quite how I came to realise this, I can't totally be sure. I suppose it was a gradual realisation over time. Even so, I have no memories of a past life, no flashbacks, and nothing like that. I suppose there were some connections to the accounts of this person referred to as Jesus. In terms of my own beliefs, there was some overlap and how I'd lived in my life for 30 years. There are some areas of agreement that seem uncannily similar, and yet there are also areas of disconnect and areas that seem so different, and uncertainty and doubts about the accuracy of the records being absolutely true. So there was a lot of doubt, and there remains to me, about how accurate are the records. I refer to the Bible or the not Genesis, but to Gospel, but a huge variety of other books as well, that various other apocryphy books too as well. And of course, there's various other claims, aren't there, in the Quran, or and even in some people allege in the Torah. That's debated by other people, of course. So the whole wealth of different records and making a variety of all different claims. And so, it's hard to sort of give an actual statement about all of them because there's so many and they make such a variety of different claims, in fact. But I certainly have had many doubts about the accuracy of many of the records as being absolutely true. Yet there was and is no doubt that I was the person that those accounts were based upon. There doesn't seem any doubt about that I was a person and the accounts were based on me. But I do have doubts about the accounts. And I suppose that probably explains why I would shy away from ever saying I was Jesus or anything like that. Just for the simple reason that is the name referred to in the accounts. That I am not sure of, and I'll come on to discuss later in more detail. And so I think it's a very loaded term in that sense, because it comes with lots of assumptions and lots of claims attached to it. And therefore, one must be dubious about either accepting or rejecting those, either affirming or negating those. Without clearly knowing, because that would clearly be wrong, to sort of give false information you didn't know. And I wouldn't want to have done that at the beginning before an investigation either. Conclusions come at the end of investigations. That's the scientific process, isn't it? And sometimes they don't even yield, you don't get full conclusions at the end of all investigations either, as we all know. And judgment comes after evidence, of course. You make a decision and discernment after you've waded through the evidence. And, and hearing and going through the evidence and weighing up all the different claims and looking at the evidence, supporting them for and against, that can be quite a lengthy process too. In fact, if you're looking at it in great detail, it's not something that happens overnight or in a weekend. So it takes time, So I guess that's been partly the reason for a long delay. But I think also I've had my own issues as well as that, I would say. But I don't have any doubt that I was the person the accounts are all based upon and that the claims are based about. But I do have doubts about the claims. So I suppose that's the reason for not wanting to refer to myself as the character. And we all are portrayed as characters in different people's stories and different people's accounts, in journals, newspapers, magazines, documentaries, in other people's conversations, down the road, different groups, at work, at home, in families. We're all going to be talked about as characters in different people's stories. And that's quite normal, but of course, whether other people's accounts of us and stories about us are accurate or not, they can be true or not sometimes. That's surely all of our experience in life. And it's surely looking at those fairly and as objectively as we can to try and determine how accurate those are. And So it's hard for me to say, not having had any actual memories from those years, of course. However, I have been, it's hard for me to make any claims that something is true or false categorically without having any memories. You know, that's quite a hard thing to sort of like can't totally you know, it's like if you imagine, you know, you woke up without any memories, or you're a dementia patient living in a care home. One family member says this about you, another says this about you. You know, imagine you're in that position. You don't, and one person says something, they're totally convinced, they believe it, they may seem very genuine. Somebody else gives you a quite contradictory and very different account. They also seem quite believable and genuine too. You know, imagine in that position. You know, it's quite hard then to assess and know, isn't it? But yeah, I'm not saying that there aren't also ways of looking into it and assessing it. Just that it is not a simple matter of accepting anything blindly, because obviously you could be quite vulnerable to sort of, if you're blindly led, you could just accept anything. And how can you accept one account and then also accept a contradictory account if you're being told, sometimes at least, very different stories about yourself? So, you know, they can't both be true. You know, you can't accept one account about you and then another one that directly contradicts it. You know, this is something, no, this is not something. So that forces you to then sort of like question, where is the truth and what is it? Quite how I came, sort of lost where I was then. So I've been in the position of neither being fully able to accept or reject any or all of the reports. I can only really therefore compare them to how I was reported to have lived with how I have lived in this life. So obviously my memories in this life of the last 38, 39 years have been fairly average. I'd say that I can remember going back to my adolescent years fairly accurately. Childhood memories, some are fairly vague, but like most people, you know, early memories start from 3 or 4, and you know, I've got fairly good memories of important life events, and scattered throughout, you know, the decades. So in this life, I've got, you know, my memories are fairly average, like most people's, I would say. So I can certainly compare this life, my memories of this life, with the claims of the other life, and contrast those two, I suppose. And of course, there's other people's remembrances, other people's accounts of me in this life too, as well. So that's, you know, there again, we're back to the Socratic problem, I suppose, of how accurate those are. Some people might be biased and like me too much and gloss over my faults, and other people might have some beef with me and might be upset with me, and they might want to sort of give a, you know, a poorer picture of me, I suppose. And other people might be very accurate and give, or other people, you know, might be quite genuine in trying to be objective, but might not always remember details after so many years. Like we all have issues after so long. It's quite normal. And like any of us, you know, we've got lots of different witness accounts, lots of different people that we've known throughout many, many years and decades. You're bound to accumulate lots of a variety of different relationships, you know, through work, through family, through social life, through meeting various people in different groups, and that. So this comparison may have some uses, I think, since I'm essentially the same person. You know, that's a core belief of mine. Different body, perhaps, but same essence, I suppose. The same person, yet in a different body and in a different time and a different place, of course. So some differences, thus, I reason, could be down to such changes, perhaps, although it's also possible that I have changed in some ways. You know, people do change. I know I'm not the same person. I don't make the same choices, I hope, as when I was 15 or 20. I hope I've matured some things In some things, I think I haven't sometimes, actually. But perhaps most notable difference is that I have not, to my knowledge, performed any miracles in this life, none whatsoever. Whereas the records, especially in the New Testament, they do make claims that at least through God's power, I had performed numerous miracles. So that's a really big difference, actually, there. What logically could be the reason for this marked difference, though? Could it be that those reports are mistaken and that they have been grossly so, since they would make up a significant part of those reports? Could they be tricks and I some charlatan, perhaps? I certainly haven't performed things and pretended not to in this life, and I haven't sort of lived that. I wouldn't say I have at all. So, or could there be rational explanations, a science that was unknown at that time to ancient people? Could it be something that wasn't a miracle but just had some sort of scientific explanation that other people didn't know about, and it just appeared like a miracle? The reports don't state that the incidents are a future advanced science, though, but actual miracles that defy rational analysis. One possibility for this difference could, though, be mistaken reports. Perhaps people had witnessed things wrong and remembered wrong. Well, you'd wonder at that, why would there be so many of those reports? But it's possible. Or could it be that I had only performed any miracles because God had ordained this, and that God simply decided I was not to do this in this life? After all, the reports do claim God has used me as an instrument, and without him I can do nothing. That's a quote from one of the scriptures. And God can choose people to fulfill different roles according to God's will. If that were so, then it would prove that the miracles were not, in essence, from me. So that's another possibility, that those miracles did happen. God gave me the power to do that in that life, in that time, but just not in this life. And I suppose that's possible, and that certainly would conclude, if that was true, that I'm not a miracle maker. They don't come from me, essentially. And either way, one firm conclusion must follow: that I am not miraculous being, and I don't have any God-like powers, but that, like other humans, I too have limitations and vulnerabilities. I am no miracle worker, and if I ever was, it was only through God. This seems to me the only logical conclusion. And there's not a lot more to say on that. That's really... even being here again, though, seems kind of like a miracle sometimes. If one calls it reincarnation or whatever else, it seems miraculous to me in the sense that I have no rational explanation for the phenomenon. I don't have any way of explaining how reincarnation happens to me or perhaps to others. So I would say that it's a type of miracle, in fact. It's only when I stop to actually think about it that I sort of realise that and think about it. But actually, I suppose having lived with that knowledge for some time, is something like you take for granted, I suppose, like anything, really. I suppose like the fact of the sun rising, or the plants growing up, or the fruit falling from the trees. It all seems miraculous in a sense. I couldn't explain it scientifically. Perhaps some people could. It's something I have heard many claims of, reincarnation. I imagine we all have, and I suppose I was and remain a sceptical agnostic. So I remain open to other people's claims of it. I just don't know, really. Now I know that reincarnation is real, and I know too, therefore, that God, or whatever we call this higher power, is also real. Although I know such things exist, I still don't know how. I don't know how reincarnation exists. I know there must be a God who's performed it, but I don't know how, and I don't know the exact nature of God. It follows quite logically that if one knows or believes in reincarnation, then one must know and believe that there is some higher power that we may choose to call God, however we understand it. This seems evident to me, since the supernatural phenomenon is something with purpose, meaning, that requires some sentient, conscious overseer. It seems absurd to believe in reincarnation and not to believe in God, like believing in science somehow, but not believing in a scientist, or believing in films, but not in actors or directors somehow. So, I mean, if there is this supernatural process of reincarnation that I've come to believe in, then I would say there must be some sort of force or something conscious that's directing it, that's behind it. My conviction that both were true grew over time. One couldn't believe in reincarnation without God, yet equally, if one believes in a transcendental God, that is a God beyond our understanding, with a power beyond our human understanding, then not only is reincarnation possible, but many other things could be possible. Things we cannot give a rational explanation for. And we don't know how. We don't know how they exist. I don't know how the earth was created, but it's here. I don't find that so incredible, although I'm often still struck by the wonder of it when I actually take time to really consider it properly. I don't find it so incredible to think that things beyond my and our collective understanding can exist, because the fact that everything is here to begin with also seems incredible. The fact that the earth, the sun and their moon and their orbits, the animals, the plants, the oceans and so on, it's only seeing it after so long that one takes it all for granted. This even has become true for reincarnation for me, oddly enough. Just the longevity of it, one takes it for granted after so long. So, you know, it's when you look at it afresh that it sort of becomes new and you realise again, you know, how amazing it all is. If we think of all scientific inventions today, aeroplanes, computers, cars, these might all seem incredible to ancient people. Who knows what future worlds would still amaze us? That being said, the fact that incredible things beyond our understanding can exist doesn't therefore imply that all incredible claims are true. We need to be cautious either before accepting or rejecting things, and some things, sometimes we have to live with the not knowing. When it comes to reincarnation, I often wonder if that happens to everyone, or most people, or just some people even. I don't know. I do know that it's possible. Certainly, many people claim such things, although how can we be sure of any claims? How can others be sure of my own claims? That's something I've wondered a lot. How can I be sure sometimes? And I've spent 30 years with no knowledge of any past life. So this would mean people can live again without having known that they have lived before. So there could be people, potentially, who don't believe in reincarnation and have no memory or knowledge of past lives, but who have had that. That certainly was true for me for decades. I have no memories of that life, nor even the one before that. Only feelings, I suppose. I guess I'd describe them as feelings somehow. So what does that mean about those that can and claim to vividly remember their past lives? Are they pretending, fantasists, or deluded? Did they reincarnate differently to me? And I honestly don't know. I don't know. Either if many others are also reincarnated, and if they are, whether they have past life memories or not, or even knowledge of it or not. Other things follow if you believe in the possibility of reincarnation. That I could, or any of us could, be brought back in a different form in the future. And that's an incredible thought, really, that any of us could be brought back at any time and place in the future. But that we alone don't have the power to do this. I can't choose to send myself to some place and time I want to. You know, it's not. I'm not the director of that. You know, I don't understand the science of it, and I certainly couldn't direct it. I'm, you know, at most a subject to it and not a creator of it or anything. But nevertheless, it's potential that any of us could be sent to any time or place in the future. God could reincarnate any of us at God's discretion. If God wills us to return again, in whatever form, it could be. Yet if God wills us not to return, we may not. Thus our ultimate future seems to be in God's hands. God is our judge and could determine if we return and how and when and where. It may be that God will make such judgments according to how we have lived and how we have treated others. But that, again, would be for God alone to decide. And that is an interesting thing to explore there. How and why might God make decisions? Although I'm referring to God in that sense, you know, I think people have different conceptions of God and different understandings, of course. And I have had as well over the years. There's a kind of liberation in this idea of only God being able to ultimately judge us. For we as humans often judge each other wrongfully. We may view someone as more innocent or more guilty than they really are, since all knowledge of each other is limited, always in fact. Although we may feel we know someone fairly well, yet we are still limited by time. We won't have been present through any person's entire life, never mind all the possible past lives. We often judge others by our experiences of them, which may be indicative of their general character or may not be representative at all. We may also not be aware of a person's life experiences, their childhood, their social influences, their victimhood, their offences, which they may not always be open about, either because it's unknown to them or too difficult perhaps to talk about, or just that we haven't yet learned that about them. We also judge others by reports that we hear about them, making views based often on second-hand accounts, which could be accurate, partially accurate, or even a distortion and inaccurate sometimes. So although we can know some things about some people in life, our knowledge of others is incomplete and not therefore enough to judge a person's soul and decide what future lives that they should lead. So it's probably a good thing in that sense that we're not able to send each other to other places and times, and that we don't have that power in that sense, just because our knowledge of others and our ability to make those judgments is limited. And I'm going to go on to discuss the rest of this in the second part of the video, I think, because my video is limited and how much that I'm able to fit in any one video. So I'll go on to talk about the next section in part 2.